Welcome to Releasing Whiteness with your co-hosts Damali Robertson, Annie Stafford, and Christine Shermer. Releasing Whiteness is a YouTube series and podcast created to explore the many ways whiteness shows up in our society and the many ways we're being called to release it. And by release it, we mean dismantle, watch it die. We mean it's way past time to give birth to something else, to our interbeingness, our shared humanity. Each of our conversations offers truth as a medicine. Each of our conversations offers mutuality as a salve. In the spirit of Sawubona, we're always asking, who do I have to be for you to be free? And who do you have to be for me to be free? Welcome to Releasing Whiteness. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you.
It's so nice to be back with you both
So
on
good.
this different
I'm glad
day.
we did this again. Yeah. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about becoming an other. Becoming an other. The fear of becoming an other. Mm-hmm. That is what we're going to talk about today. Who are we? I'm Damali Robertson. I'm the creator and founder and moderator of this conversation, Releasing Whiteness. I'm grateful to be here with my two friends. And my pronouns are she and her, by the way. Do you want to say?
Thank you for that. My name is Annie Stafford, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a musician. I play with the Afro-Brazilian band Sambada, as well as some other great projects. And I am passionate about music and social justice.
Yay! And who are you?
I'm Christine Shermer, and my pronouns are also she, her. And I am also passionate about social justice and just trying to figure out how to be a white person in the world who is always striving to be an anti-racist person also.
Mm-hmm. This is why we're friends.
Yeah.
You know, that's why. Yes, we all passionate about social justice. We got that in common.
Yeah.
All right, so let me ask the first question. So I like to start some of my questions with like a real personal reflection of what it means to me. I'm someone who identifies as queer, and I come from communities and people, and I mean Jamaican people. I mean, very often church-based people are homophobic. They are, believe that gay people, queer people are going to hell. And, growing up, I hear that a lot. I heard that a lot in churches and spaces that to be queer is an abomination, for example. And so, there was always a fear. And I without getting into my whole story, I think somewhere subconsciously there was a fear planted that even though I came out to myself many years later in my 40s, like I recognize that in there planted is this subconscious sense that anything that's outside of heteronormativity is a sin. That I would be rejected, I would be expelled from my family, people would not love me, people would not care for me. So it was like I hung on into, that heteronormativity for a while. And so coming out even in my 40s, to myself, and then little by little, my dad, my mom, my kids, right? But there's still communities that I don't talk to about this. Mm-hmm. Haven't yet, and maybe I'm doing it now. But the real fear, I think, is something that held me back from being more active, being more out, being more loud and proud, right? And I think it was the fear of becoming an other. Mm-hmm. How do you think, if at all, that translates to whiteness when it comes to racism and oppression? Do you think there's fear of becoming an other if they become more anti-racist? That's the question for the table.
I think that it's sort of a subconscious, it's that idea you were talking about where it's conditioned into us as white-bodied people. It's confusing. That's why I'm pausing so long to even think of an answer, because on the one hand, growing up, I was absolutely taught that racism is wrong, it's horrible, it's harmful, and like we are not racist people, right?
Right.
Okay.
Without, without that level of awareness of all the ways that we benefit from racism and just sort of have it conditioned into us by the larger culture around us. And there is still this sort of like deep fear of, being kicked out of a community, a family, an identity group, which I think probably all of us carry to some degree or another. But yet also that white people who do stand up, especially in this modern time, well, are attacked in certain circles, but also are, applauded in other spaces. So I'm sort of talking in circles because I feel like it's such a complex.
Where do you think they're applauded?
Question.
Which spaces are they applauded? The ones that are vocal, the white folks.
Well,
that are...
I feel like in places where people of conscience, people who are passionate about social justice, I think when people stand on their principles, there are pockets where that is really supported. At the same time that can be a huge public backlash against them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of like aspects of that are very like context dependent, and the context of your family and your community, your spiritual center, like that matters a lot in terms of, I think, the level of risk, and reaction, and negative reaction. I was thinking, just asking myself, in what ways do I feel like my, standing up, and being sort of an out and proud anti-racist, like in what ways do I feel like that has felt, like it was going to cost me something, or, lead to, being othered. And I think it's interesting because I think what I notice in myself is something that I think also connects with my journey to coming out, as queer and as a lesbian. Like the biggest thing that I think gets, when I get in my own way, is rather than I think it's very connected to the fear of becoming another, but it's the fear or the worry of making people uncomfortable.
There we go. That word
again.
again.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I'm just like on a whole thing with that. But, when I think about, how long it took me to come out, and, I think it's a constant process, I think that there are times where it just felt like, I'm just going to just be under the radar, fly under the radar here, which is, that's a privilege to be able to do that.
I was
and it
just
has
thinking that.
yeah, yeah. And there's...
And not for you, for me, at straight privilege. That when I fly under the radar as a straight appearing person, it's because I can.
Right, exactly.
And, who's going to know?
Yes.
And I could just do it.
Yes.
And it's it's coming from a place of privilege, which is a thing I'm confronting now, where I'm like, yeah, you could, but why would you continue to do that?
Right.
When you know the other side of this is a lot of harm, violence. Like, you need to stand on the side of, who you really are at whatever cost. So this is what I'm meaning.
Yeah. No, 100%, and like, I think there's so many layers to that, and there's times at which I'm like outed without even coming out, and then there's other times where I feel like I do have the privilege of flying under the radar. It really depends on so many things, but I feel like I was really encouraged by my bestie, Donda, who's an Afro-Brazilian
Hi, Donda.
woman. Yeah, exactly. And I think she's been really an incredible ally to me as a queer person, being more vocal about my identity. And I think some of that comes from her wisdom that anytime we're not fully embracing who we are, we're there's a cost to that, right? So she wants to see me in my fullest, And then there's also a thing of like having, I think, lived her whole life as a Black woman. There's a way that like, why, like, I can't hide. Why, like there's sort of this that muscle again of having had to develop that muscle. And so knowing also the liberation in claiming and standing powerfully and unapologetically in who you are and shining your light, and she knows that liberation in herself, and so she wants it also for me. And so that's been a gift. But as for being an anti-racist white person, it's interesting when the costs of that, when the sort of the forces that want you to be quiet and get in line as a white person come up. And I've experienced that, and I've had to make a decision and talk myself through my own fear in pushing against that, and it's surprising
I'm
sometimes.
like, what does that look like? Talking yourself through. What's that? Take us there.
Sometimes it's been at work, my previous day job, feeling like I need to speak up right now. First of all, there's not enough diversity in this room, and so I'm, if I don't say it, it's quite likely going to go unsaid. And it may make people uncomfortable. I may get pushback. I may get denial. I may get that, very subtle eye rolling of like, there she goes again, which like I often felt was
Story of my life.
right. Exactly. And again, it's a privilege to even decide, right?
Yeah.
But and then in other relationships, musical relationships, band relationships, speaking up, speaking out, pushing back, challenging, speaking about what I felt like racist and misogynoir underpinnings of decisions that get made, or dynamics, power dynamics, band dynamics, and speaking up to those, and feeling like this is going to cause this is going to create tension in relationships and stretch relationships. And like when you stretch something, you're like, is it gonna stretch and be like opening, or is it gonna break it? And you don't know.
Wow. What about you? I'm curious about that same thing that Annie was talking about, like in work, talking yourself through it.
Yeah.
Or not only work, maybe wherever it is that it happens. Have you had any similar experiences?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. The first is in the workplace. We had a situation, we had the summer of 2020, George Floyd's murder, the uprisings, and I did my doctoral dissertation on anti-racist teaching, and I used critical race theory as my framework for my dissertation. And so during the summer of 2020, there's this sudden surge in demand for workshops and trainings, and people want to learn and understand about racism and anti-racism. And so a colleague who knew that this was my dissertation reached out and asked me to create a workshop, which I did. So that's the context for, at some point down the road, I don't remember if it was like that in December of 2020 or like a year later, there was a federal mandate that we were not allowed to use critical race theory in trainings in the workplace. That is, if you were federally funded, which I'm not in my position, but this got handed down to all of us staff that we weren't allowed to do this.
Unbelievable.
And in that particular case, I'll just share my journey because I don't think I was very successful, but I had a moment where I was like, this is that moment. Like, this is your time to push back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, but I will be fired. And I don't want to lose my job.
Right, right.
And then I thought, you have no choice. This is ridiculous. You can't be like, anti-racist, critical race theory, here's the training, and then be like, oh, I'm not allowed to say it anymore. Okay, let me sit down and be quiet.
Right.
So I wrote to a leadership person close to me and said, who can I contact about this?
Yeah.
Because it's not right.
Yeah. Wow.
And their response was, you'll be wasting your time. You'll appear very naive, and I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Mm.
And so then I went back through my cycle of like, I'm like, I'm going to be fired. And then meanwhile, someone who I work with who also has a role at the VA, so that's a federally funded place,
Yep.
had received the same information from their supervisor and forwarded it to me and said, basically, we're going to continue. I want you to continue doing what you're doing, and I will take the heat for it. So in that case, I'm sharing that story, trying to be really anonymous about who I spoke to about what. I'm sharing that story to say that we often have this moment where we think we have to do it alone
Right.
as white people, and that is like a real feature of whiteness, that we're all alone and we have to do everything by ourselves and don't need community. And I did that, right? Immediately, my first thing is I have to figure this out all by myself, and I have to write the email to this like really important person, and I have to get it anyway. So we can lean on each other for support.
Yeah.
And in other contexts for me, like in the family context, it's a little bit easier for me just because, I don't know, I feel like I have an approach there. I feel like I'm not going to get kicked out of my family. I still have the same fears. I really do. Like, I still sometimes, I don't push as hard as I could.
That's good, by the way, that you're not kicked out of your family.
Yeah.
Come on, family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on, families. I don't push as hard as I could because the fear is not non-existent about, like, it's some kind of like primordial thing almost. It's so deep in there. But it's easier for me in that context to share stories of people I know, people whose lives, people of color, people of the global majority is another phrase I've heard that I like. And I guess in that context, because people know me so well and know where I'm coming from, it's like a little bit easier. It still is scary, and there are definitely times when I don't speak up when I could. I had a follow-up question for you, Annie, because I think you're a lot braver than me, and I think you do this a lot more often. And I wonder if in the moments when you have pushed and known that feared the relationship might snap, what have been the outcomes? Has it been a mixed bag?
That's a great question, and I don't think I'm braver than you, Christine. And like, I love what you just shared. I think that's, and it's particularly the part about not getting trapped in that myth of individualism. That's beautiful. What I feel like I'm learning is that to trust, and to trust other people, to trust the relationships, and that they can be stretched, and they can fray a little bit, and then they can then become the stronger for the fraying. There was one particular case in which I think we were like hanging out and going on some walks. I definitely remember sharing this with you on a walk with you, Damali, like just doing some of that stretching with a bandmate, and really feeling like, ooh, this is changing our relationship. This, I am pushing and challenging and speaking in a way that I have not in this relationship before. I have, but then I've backed off, or And it did change the relationship, but I think it didn't break the relationship, you know? And that was such a powerful teaching for me, because I'm like, oh, okay, you know? And for me, realizing, I keep saying it, but the discomfort, like being brave and stepping into discomfort and knowing that I can stay with something that feels scary and uncomfortable to me, and that I can trust somebody else to stay, you know, which is, I mean, it's not always the case, but often, you know, having more faith and more trust in each other. Um, and you know, the thing I feel like that I'm learning though, and this is a real growing edge thing for me, is the more I can be um, authentic and vulnerable rather than angry,
Mm-hmm.
and go to a kind of an almost like, I think I can get really in my head and use that as, and this was pointed out to me by the person that I had some of these hard conversations with, is that they shared with me that I can use my words as weapons. When I get mad, I can kind of draw on things that I've read and fire away, and that felt like it didn't get us to an opening place. And so I think what I'm learning is to be vulnerable and to drop into the heart place rather than the.
But here's the thing, and I want to just say this to all the people watching, that one growing edge for me is like not interrupting people when they're talking, especially when they say something super insightful that I like just want to like come and talk about right away. So like I'm like working on like,
But I kind of love
Just-
it when
yeah.
you point out those
Yeah.
I'll
moments.
just be
Damani.
saying
Mic drop moments.
And
Yeah.
you just said that right. So
Please
if
feel
y'all
free.
ever see me over here like screaming, it's because of that. So when you said a few minutes back when I was like, don't interrupt her. Okay. That it changed your relationship, but it didn't break it.
Yeah.
I thought that was so like, oh my God, if that's one thing to like point to for everyone having these conversations, because, and you know, I'm in a specific period in my own life right now with relationships, with people, with change, and what it means when you're different than you used to be, and having people get to know you again, and you getting to know someone who's changed, and what it looks like to really adapt to this person's new stuff. And like, I'm in that in my life.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm like looking at is that everything changes,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to break.
Yeah.
Right? And what you're saying is by having a courageous, a brave, whichever one we want to call it, just a frank conversation, our fear is that we're going to break something. But what if we change it? And what is the power in changing it so that maybe that person walks away with something they didn't have before? And you walk away with the like, I did it.
Yeah.
And we're still in relationship actually.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us are paralyzed by fear of having these conversations because we think we're going to lose the people,
Yeah.
that everything's going to be wiped away. But is change such a bad thing?
Yeah.
You know, and so you pointed out change. And so I wanted to just lift that up, that this is going to require change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And change is so scary, and yet it's like it's totally just part of life.
Yeah.
We're all changing and evolving. I was just sitting here thinking about for myself. I'm turning 50 soon, very imminently, and I've just been spending a lot of time thinking about how I've lived my life, being very conflict avoidant, being very afraid to stand for myself and speak for myself, and how limiting and how you twist yourself into knots trying to just be whatever other people want you to be or think you should be, number one. And then number two, how much more people can trust, like how much stronger the relationship is when everyone really knows where everyone is coming from.
Yeah.
You know, and having those hard conversations and being able to grow through them is, it's just, it seems so scary, but it's actually so much better.
Yeah, and it's interesting because black-bodied, bodied of cultures, bodies of culture have these same issues, right? Like
Yeah, these are
of
common.
fear of having certain conversations. Like I
Yeah.
was in a meeting at work recently where I noticed myself, and this issue of the genocide that's happening in Palestine is huge, right?
It's a big
Because
one.
talk about being afraid of being fired if you
Right.
say the wrong thing, right? Talk about like the feeling of I'm gonna be completely like separated from any revenue streams if I say the wrong, right? So there's like
Yeah.
this you're gonna be canceled thing.
Yep.
But I had to say it the other day in a meeting. I had to say, listen, because there was this incident where someone used the phrase from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, in a context where there were people who felt threatened by that in the work context, and so we've been trying to figure out how to deal with that as a group of people who know that this thing happened. And I sat with it as a human, and I thought, well, I wonder if people know that that phrase doesn't have an innate I want to harm Jewish people built into it.
Right.
I wonder if people understand that that phrase about liberation is about, and I said in the meeting, I managed to get my words and say, like, to me, that phrase means I want children who live in Palestine to grow up to have the same opportunities that children in Israel do. That's all that phrase means to me when I hear it. When I hear it, I want people in Palestine to be able to live in their homes without having their homes demolished, without the fear of having like someone come and take them from their homes and keep them in whatever they're like locked up and tortured. I want them to have the same opportunities as people in Israel who have a home, who can live in a non-apartheid state.
Mm-hmm.
What it means to me is I want the apartheid state to crumble and people to be able to walk to and from their neighborhoods without permits or passes or going through security checkpoints. But that's what I want for myself, what I want for you, what I want for you. And that's what that phrase means to me. But if we only demonize the phrase and we
Right.
only take what the Western media and propaganda that props up that it means harming other people, where are we going to get? How will we even get to the other side of this conversation? So, I say that because I think that we also, as black-bodied people, bodies of culture, have fear
Right. Yeah.
about what will people say about us, and
Right.
probably maybe even a little bit more that
Yeah.
we're gonna get fired quick,
Right.
fast, and in a
Right.
hurry if we ever
Yes.
cross the
Yeah.
line.
100%. I just when you said that about the phrase, I thought, isn't it interesting how the cultures of oppression make us fear anything that speaks of liberation and equality and see that as a threat. And I think that's very interesting, like how that gets viewed as a threat and how people view affirmative action as a threat and how, um, how giving people equity and equal rights is thought of as taking something away,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think that really reveals a lot about what is intrinsically known about how oppression works.
Mm.
Is like, that says a lot more about the person who is afraid. If you somehow know, in the words of the great Toni Morrison, that the only way you can look tall is by making me be on my knees, then you have the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that says a lot about the fear, if somehow a statement like, from the land to the sea, Palestine will be free, is scary. Why?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with all there's, anyway.
Do
It's
you have
amazing.
any thoughts to add on this before I move into another question?
I was just pondering how basically just what you were just saying listening to you, Annie, thinking about how funny it is that when you really turn a critical eye to these to
Yeah.
these like sort of concepts or I don't know what the word is, phenomena that can easily run our lives if we're just sort of asleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's so absurd.
Right.
Like that, just like a group of people wanting for themselves what I have for myself,
Right.
would be threatening in some way. It
Right.
makes no sense.
Right. Yeah.
But I actually think that's what whiteness does, though.
Yep.
I mean, just to like,
100%.
and I think we always have to separate whiteness from white people, right? And I think that anybody who's understands whiteness knows that it's not white people. It's a construct that is about separation, domination, imperialism, control, right? So, but I think that's what it does, is it
Yeah.
builds a whole thing. And so
Yeah.
you can't even question it.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that it's set up is it doesn't want you to question it.
Yes.
It doesn't want you to say, no, hold on a second. Really? Is that what it means? It wants you to go, oh, yeah, that must be what it means. That must be anyone who says, because they're legislating against it now.
Right.
Like, you can't even really say
Right.
it. So, they're
Right.
I mean, that's what our government's been up to.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't-
And the thing that you go is like, what about conversation and meaning making?
Right.
What about asking people what they mean?
Yeah.
That to me is a mind-blowing indigenous kind of decolonial move.
Right.
So if you say from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, what do you mean by that, Christine? Could I ask you that instead of assuming I know what you mean?
Right.
But I think that's what whiteness does.
Right.
You're right about that. You're right about that. It's the same model as we're seeing on the university campuses
Yes.
with sort of the squelching of
Yes. I was
protest.
just thinking about that, and those
Um,
memos that come down too.
Oh my gosh.
It's
It's just like the critical race theory
Oh, it's
memo,
just
right?
yeah.
And the thing that, again, it's mind-boggling is it's a university, and our job is to be teaching how to be curious, how to ask that question, how to inquire, how to have your idea, but then build it, make it bigger with other people's and
Right.
reshape it,
Yeah.
I feel really sad about that, by the way,
I do
that
too.
so many institutions of higher learning
Right.
have taken this stance. I mean, college campuses are the place where resistance is built, where ideas that are still, like with us today have been built and formed and shaped, right? And they're not the only places, because there are plenty of places where resistance is shaped outside of the context. But I think, we have to give it some room that there are many people we can point to that, have their ideas coming out of these college campuses
Yeah.
of revolution, of protest, of resistance, and the narrative that's been woven about protest being violent and dangerous.
Yeah.
And I mean, the ways we've seen politicians just rattle off, well, we believe in protest, except it can't be violent. And it can't, I think there was one, I think this is at Columbia too, where it can't interfere with
Right.
the operations of the
Right,
university.
right.
Well, that's what protest is.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's an interference of the
Exactly.
status quo and business as usual. And to have so many college campuses be like against this, the voices of students, calling in police, allowing in these
Immediately.
violent counter protesters
Yeah.
who beat people at UCLA. I believe it was UCLA where
Yeah.
they came in and they beat those people, and they didn't receive the same I am aghast by the
Yeah.
government and the university
Administration.
leadership.
Mhm.
I was we going in the wrong direction here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think though, in as much as college campuses have been the places this, where people, have had their, consciousness expanded and learned about liberation movements and began to participate in them, they've also been long the site of
Yeah,
squelching
exactly.
them,
Exactly.
and they,
Yeah.
they're functioning at the sort of the systemic level. They're functioning to uphold the systems of
Yeah.
oppression. I thought it was really interesting, Christine, when you said that somebody that you spoke to when you were wanting to push back against that mandate to leave out critical race theory called you naive.
Mm.
And that really, I was really I felt that, and I was thinking about why, and I think that really speaks to, because I think I've often also encountered that, and it's a very, like, it's a pretty like disingenuous kind of thing to call somebody who is trying to speak out against repression,
Yeah.
to call you naive.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and that's something that I think white folks do to other white folks in particular.
Doesn't surprise me though.
Oh, right, exactly. But I think it was like,
Because like the groupthink thing that I want to talk about.
yes.
It's like you're interrupting something that I think is an agreed upon don't rock the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you think you can rock the boat, that's I think where it's
Yeah.
coming from, is like this audacity to be different.
Right. But what I think is really interesting is the use of the word naive, right? Because instead of saying you shouldn't rock the boat,
Yeah. Yeah.
your sort of your understanding of the real world is being questioned.
Yeah.
Like, you're naive to think
That's-
that you could change that.
Childlike.
You're naive.
It's
Yes.
patronizing, right?
It's
Childlike.
so patronizing
Yeah.
and condescending, and it sort of takes the wind out of your sails.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, am I naive? And you guys all know that this is going on, but you have a better way
Yeah.
than speaking out. So I'm just naive to think that I
Right.
could say something and it could change something.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that's so insidious. That was the word I was trying to get to.
There goes a word.
Yeah.
Insidious.
Yeah.
Whiteness is insidious.
It really is.
And
Yeah.
things, moments like that.
Yeah.
Insidious. There you
Yeah,
go.
because it takes away
Oh.
your own, like the momentum of your own desire to stand in something. Like, yeah. Ooh.
And it worked. Like, it's funny that you're bringing it up because I'm remembering receiving that email and how I felt. I felt like a child. I
Right.
felt like, how dumb of me.
Yeah.
I had that moment.
Right.
Before I was like, wait a minute, that's, you know?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you question yourself
Yeah. Yeah. It worked.
It works.
for a minute.
That's why they keep
For a
doing
minute.
it. But that's why they do it. That's why
Right.
people write those emails.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why we have administrations the way and hierarchies and the way they form, with some gatekeeping people in central places, because they want to dissuade and discourage anything that might be free thought or push against the envelope, I think.
Yeah.
I've also like had that word naive, like, and I think its opposite is the people that say when you talk about Gaza and when you talk about the genocide happening there and you talk about Palestine being free, and you have people that say that that's naive and that you don't really understand what's going on because it's
yeah.
complicated.
Oh my God.
And the other side of that is the complexity of the issue and the idea that by wanting people to be free,
Right.
you don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I think that's a very, again, it's like that condescension. And I recently experienced this in a conversation that I just didn't understand, and that's why I had this naive
Right.
wish for the Palestinian
Right.
people to be free.
Right. And here's the thing that's interesting to me about that is that I've heard that it's complicated narrative, it's complicated. And the way I see it is there's no complication.
No.
There's a clear 76-year history of oppression and colonialism, occupation and apartheid that has increasingly gotten worse, actually. And and this is what they don't talk about, is the violence, that the occupier has been violent and has been a terrorist to the people who've been occupied.
For 76 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's been
Yeah.
back and forth of this kind of move toward ethnic cleansing over the years, where there are times when there's the occupier will violently eliminate thousands of people. And as a world around, we've just looked the other way, as governments, as whatever the different G7s or whatever the different, governing bodies. It's been a look away, right? But it's like it's not complicated, actually.
Right.
And what's complicated is the way power gets wielded,
Right.
the way that it just is accepted that no one's going to intervene. That feels complicated to me.
And the justification.
Right. That feels like I don't understand that. And maybe that's above my pay grade, that no one has stepped in to stop this.
Right.
But, you know, I want to just weave in Sudan,
Yes.
the Congo,
Congo.
what's happening in Haiti.
Yeah.
And there are other instances, there's so many instances of violence around the world that if we spent the time listing them, we would take the entire hour probably just naming. But that's the thing that I find to be completely insidious, is the dehumanization of so many groups of people, especially when we look at people who are melanated.
Yeah.
You generally see a pattern of the darker the groups are, the more melanin, the more that they get hit with the vitriol of whiteness in these different forms. So whether it is the child labor mines in the Congo to build devices that we all use, whether it is the funding of this particular the group, I think it's the RSF in Sudan, and that funding coming from governments with a lot of power, like whatever it is that's having people experience the level of violence and trauma that we're seeing. And you know, I'll end here, I swear, people, I swear. I'll just be off on my little thing. But I'll end here that I think that we're creating a more violent world every day when we do this.
Yes.
Because the trauma that gets leveled in each of these societies, right? We're just replicating more trauma on trauma. And so 50 years from now, 100 years, we'll be living the implications of this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So take that to the bank. That's not naive. That's real. And so, you know, I'm wanting to change it.
Yeah. 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 That's...
It's a lot, y'all.
It's...
Anything else on that before I ask my next question? I feel like we'd be getting off into these conversations. Maybe what I'll do is make this my final question, because we've had such a rich conversation about this. But, you know, I think we've covered the fact that it takes brave conversations to make some change, right? We've covered the fact that we've had to do it at work, and we've, you know, but I think what I appreciate about being at the Othering and Belonging conference that I went to in April in the Bay, and people follow the Othering and Belonging Institute, read the book. You know, I think the book's title is Belonging Without Othering or something like that. John Paul, look him up. But I think the thing is that what I've figured out is that whiteness and the things that come from it are really a mechanism of belonging. Like, I used to think it was a mechanism of othering. But really, it is a mechanism of belonging. I belong to this group. I look around the room of people who are clinging to power in this moment, clinging to whatever. But I see myself there. These are my people. And if I speak out, if I interrupt or try to disrupt, I might not be included here anymore. So really, in a last ditch effort to still belong somewhere and see myself, I'll stand against humanity. I'll stand against Black, brown, indigenous people. I'll stand against queer, trans people, because at least here I feel like I belong. What are your thoughts about that idea of like this whiteness construct as a mechanism of belonging?
It's interesting because I've thought of it for so long as like a mechanism of control. But I think that's so accurate. That is a mechanism of belonging, because the fear that I keep describing in this conversation is a fear of being fired, being kicked out of the family, having a friendship end, right? Like a relationship breaking. So obviously that's what I'm seeking, is that sense of belonging.
And do you think other white folks, white-bodied people, are seeking that sense too?
I think so. think it's like sort of a human instinct to want to be in the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's safer in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's such an illusion too. I think the first illusion is if if the only people that are in your group, if you're only in a group with white folks, then that becomes an issue. But it's almost the reverse or the inverse is true if you're the the group, the community, the family that you belong to is diverse, then that is not the risk. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing. But I mean, I completely agree that that's what's going on. It's just interesting
Mm-hmm.
because the only way that works is if you stay in this, pretty rigid bubble that isn't our world.
Right.
And then the other thing I was thinking of is that another thing that I think really pulls back the illusion is the minute that you don't fit into that in some way, whether it's your gender or sexual orientation, your a different ability, you know, or a different neurological, like there's so many things that can kind of just lift back that veil and go, oh yeah, like I don't actually belong in this way, or I am already on the margins. But then I think when you're on the margins, you have a choice of like, do I do everything to try to get to that center? It's the adjacent myth that it's dangerous in a different way, because then you find yourself kind of trying to overcompensate, or do you just go, hey, that whole thing is bullshit, and, and I am, so yeah, it's really interesting how that plays out.
You know what came up for me as you were talking, Annie, is two things I want to touch on quickly. And this is going to white spaces as a black-bodied person. And then I also want to quickly touch on the affirmative action decision that was made, feels like within the last year or so. But
Yeah.
point one is, I can't tell you how many times I've been to, like, let's say I have a white friend who's getting married. I'm the one black person at this person's wedding. Or I go to like something some other white friends having, and I'm like one black body in the space. And I think to myself, and usually I meet these people at work, usually some work stuff, right? And but there's this one person I'm thinking of in particular where I went to their wedding, and I was like one or two of. And I think both of the black brown people were from work settings, And I was like, wow, because I feel like black and brown, indigenous people, like folks, I mean, speaking of my own family, and generally we have more of a mix. Generally, you'll see a few more people in the space because of the way the world kind of works. But I think white people still are able to create
Shit.
like immense silos for themselves.
Yeah.
I think that they are still able to have white only gatherings, white only offices, white only, right? Because I think they built that world and they're so comfortable there that they're okay with it, but they're not thinking, oh damn, there's not like a mix of people around my table.
Right.
Which is a lot, but then that connected me to what happened at the universities, because, when you think about the history of the university system here, and the fact that HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, were built because universities across the board, the predominantly white institutions, you legally couldn't attend these institutions.
Right.
So there was a whole, we need these HBCUs to get educated. But the idea now that, having the diversity and having more representation is taking away from, after you have the history of legacy admissions and you have the history of the way white folks have played this game, it's really, to me, I guess the use of the word insidious comes up again. But it's like, when do we stop as black and brown people forcing ourselves to the wedding,
Mm-hmm.
to the dinner, and into the universities,
Mm-hmm.
and get to the place. And this is my opinion. This is where what I think about sometimes. I'm just like, okay, I'm good where I'm at, cause y'all for some reason something hasn't clicked for y'all that this is part of the oppression too.
Right.
Anyway,
No,
I feel like I was just on a little bit of a high, like a
no, I think that's so important. The siloing and the unexamined siloing and the unexamined bubbles, because I think it's that unexamined piece that's amazing to me. And I think it's particularly interesting. I think we have stories that we tell within whiteness that it's kind of like, you kind of touched on this, Christine, like, we like to tell ourselves that we're not racist. I think that's a really important piece of sort of like the white liberal identity, and it's like you can decide like, oh, I am not a racist. Like it's like I can claim that, and I think that it's really interesting to me when people who self-identify as not racist or people who self-identify as liberal or progressive still have those silos. Like it's very predominant, and particularly at social events, family slash friend, chosen family. And I'm like, if you're looking at your chosen family and it's all white, like what's going on? Or you have one black friend or one brown friend. Like, what?
I'm happy to report that I'm not the token in either of your
Right, exactly.
But every time I hang out with y'all, spend any time with y'all, there's a mix of folks. I'm happy. I'm just letting the viewers,
Yeah.
I'm not the one black friend.
Yeah.
Either one of these two.
Yay.
Well, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about geography and like suburbs, and I'm having this like half thought from, I'm still thinking about summer 2020, which we spoke about in our last episode, when there was this whole thing of like white people need to ask, black people, like what can I, not like what can I do, but it was sort of like trying to be like, just see that there are black people around you. And then there was sort of this thing of like white people looking for a black person, like because of the, I mean,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not being clear because I don't remember exactly
No,
what I
I know.
saw, but
Yeah.
because of these silos and because of like the history of this country, many white people live in all white or predominantly white communities. And so they work in, if not 100% white, very much predominantly white organizations. They shop in stores and only see white people. These are also communities where even like often in service jobs, we'll see diversity, but even in many of these communities, there's not even diversity, like in no level of the community is what I'm trying to say. And then because of the way that whiteness works, there's no question about that. That's just kind of normal, quote unquote.
Well, I used to, at my previous job, one of the ways that I was a squeaky wheel was with hiring. And we talked about this quite a bit. And living in Santa Cruz, demographically, it's very white. However, there's a lot of nuance and layers to that. First of all, there's a large Latino and Latinx community, and it's like segregated in many different ways. It's segregated in terms of the county of Santa Cruz, where people are able to live, how expensive housing is, but it's also segregated in terms of power and in terms of jobs, and then there's a beautiful there are black folks and black communities. I didn't want to like make it singular because it's like there's lots of different communities, but in Santa Cruz, and yet I would like speak up about like hiring at work and be told, well, just Santa Cruz is so white, So that's
Right.
just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, interesting, because I know that demographically, statistically, there's some truth to that, but there's also, you know, it's not my lived experience in Santa Cruz. The Santa Cruz that I live in is not only white, you know, and yeah, maybe it takes more effort,
That part.
you know,
The effort.
yeah, but if that is your, you know, and again, it can't be that thing of like, I'm going to go out today and make a black friend, because like
Find a black
that is just, oh my goodness. And it really, I see that, you know, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh dear. So it has to be authentic and intentional, and it has to be, you know, organic. But I think we, there's an acceptance of white space that is part of the, you know, really big part of the problem,
Yeah.
and the excuses, you know, and the, yeah.
I feel like we could go on and on with this forever, because this is such a deep topic: the whiteness, the belonging, the excuses. I mean, you know, I think I tell people all the time that when you're a black person, black, brown person in workspaces, for example, and you have the ability to hire,
Right.
sometimes you're like, okay, you know, especially in white spaces, you're like, how could I get like maybe a person of color, but you feel kind of yucky. You feel like, can I do that? You
Right.
know, like, is that okay to
Right.
like really? And then you realize that that's what white-bodied folks have been doing forever. And so, you know, I've gotten to the point where I say, listen, if we're hiring and there's a candidate that is qualified and meets all the, because you see, this is where they get you, is they start talking about people who are less qualified. And in fact, most of the DEI hires are more qualified than their white
yes,
counterparts,
exactly.
have far more degrees and far more experiences,
Yeah.
because they have to. There's a knowing within us that we have to be very degreed to
Yep.
get to certain places. So we
Yep.
really invest in education and different certifications. A lot of us, at least, there's a lot of us who've been told you have to be twice as good
Yep.
to make it half as far.
Yep.
So we like get in there and we get our degrees. So it's a misnomer. It's completely misleading
It's
to say that DEI hires, and I think it's an insult to call folks a DEI hire, first of all.
100%.
But second of all, if we're going to play the game and use the term, those DEI hires are doubly qualified. Let's just look at Kamala Harris right now, and look at Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Right.
Look around at the people. They got more degrees than you, okay?
Yeah.
So, and lots of experience to go with it. But I think, you know, you feel as a, like, oh, this is so, can I do it? But now I do it with pride. Like, I do it with a
Yes.
sense of like, okay,
Yes.
we got these 3 positions open. Okay, blah, blah,
Yes.
blah. If I see someone who's a marginalized identity that we need the representation for, that meets the criteria, and we're neck and neck with somebody else, I'm gonna actually advocate for that person.
Yep.
To bring that representation in, because I can't tell you, y'all, what it means to have representation.
Oh, yeah.
I can't. I mean, I think Black, Brown, Indigenous people try to tell people what it means to have, like I remember Sonia Sotomayor, like what it means to have a Supreme Court justice who's Latinx. What it means to have Ketanji Brown Jackson, representation wise.
Yeah.
What it means to have Simone Biles and Misty Copeland, and let's just keep looking around. You know, what it means to have in every pocket of society folks that look like you, that you can aspire to. It matters.
And it matters to all of us.
Right.
Like, I remember when President Obama was elected, and I remember having this conversation with a good friend of mine who said, you know, there's a whole generation of kids that their first president is black, and their first family is black. And like, that changes everybody. You know, all the white kids that grow up.
Yes.
And that's it's an unquestioned reality, you know, and like, yeah, and it changes, that starts to change some of that baked in white supremacy on this cellular level,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful thing. And it's why the backlash was so strong.
And even when I think about schools, I can't tell you what a big difference it means to have a teacher
Yes.
that is representative of the student body, especially if you have black, brown students, bodies of culture. They need more teachers who have that same representation because, you know, I think there was some wise person who said, like, you know, students aren't going to learn from teacher. If you don't care for someone, you can't teach them.
Yeah.
And I recognize that more and more as I, you know, explore equity and different work that I've been doing in DEIB, is that you actually, people aren't going to thrive in hostile conditions.
Right.
Students,
Period.
employees, in the hostility, you're going to see the failure, the shrinking, the fight, flight,
Yep.
right? The freeze, the
Yep.
fawn, the collapse. We're going to see that in hostile conditions because that's what the body does. It's it's in a survival
Yeah.
space, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to do one of those things. But when you pour love on it, when you pour I see you on it,
Yeah.
that sawbona on it, you create the conditions for something else. And so that's what we're here
Yeah.
to talk about. Any parting thoughts, y'all, as we come to a close on our second episode?
I just want to say again out loud, pour love on it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Pour love on it.
Yeah.